They were thought to be gone, buried by time, swallowed by oceans, erased by history. But then, archaeologists stumbled upon something they weren't prepared for: entire cities, temples, and villages that shouldn't exist anymore, but do. And what they found inside wasn't just stone and dust, it was movement, sound, and secrets no one was supposed to uncover. From a monastery that still whispers to a sunken city that remembers your presence, these places weren't lost. They were hiding. Welcome to Unsolved Archives, where we delve into the hidden, the mysterious, and the unanswered. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insight could be the key to unlocking the truth. The Whispering Monastery of Khara, Khoto. In the far reaches of the Gobi Desert, surrounded by dunes that shift like waves and temperatures that drop below freezing at night, lies the forgotten city of Khara, Khoto, the Black City. For centuries, it was nothing more than a ghost story traded between nomads and traders traveling the Silk Road. Tales of a cursed city swallowed by the sands were dismissed as legend, until a Soviet expedition in the early 20th century uncovered ancient ruins that hinted at something much older and stranger than previously imagined. But it wasn't until decades later, when a joint team of Chinese and Mongolian archaeologists returned with advanced mapping tools, that the true mystery began to unravel. The city itself, built by the Tangut people during the Western Xia dynasty, had been assumed to have perished in 1372 during a siege by Ming forces. What baffled the archaeologists was the unnatural level of preservation. The stone walls still stood tall, partially protected by centuries of sand accumulation. Intact scrolls, murals, and personal artifacts lay scattered in abandoned homes, untouched by scavengers. It was as though the residents had fled in an instant. No signs of prolonged warfare, no mass graves, no soot from fires. But the real discovery came when they entered the monastery in the heart of the city, known locally as the Whispering Hall. The structure appeared modest from the outside, weather-worn sandstone and a collapsed dome. But inside, the air was inexplicably cool and dry, preserving wall paintings that glowed with faded reds and golds. As the team began their documentation, one researcher, Dr. Lien Su, noticed something eerie. When she called to her assistant in the main chamber, her voice didn't echo, it duplicated. Faintly at first, then unmistakably, her own voice returned to her a few seconds later, even though no one was speaking. Everyone assumed it was the acoustics of the domed ceiling. But the effect didn't happen in any other room. Audio equipment picked up whispers that weren't audible to the human ear. Some sounded like prayers in a lost dialect, others were fragments of chants that looped in unnatural ways. When they played the recordings back at their camp, one clip made a seasoned sound engineer quit the project altogether. In it, the whispers formed clear sentences in Mandarin, as if interpreting themselves. "We are still here. The sand does not forget." The team brought in more sophisticated sound mapping tools to study the phenomenon. The central chamber had a strange geometry that caused sound to bounce in ways impossible to replicate artificially. But some of the echoes were arriving before the source sounds were even made, caught by hypersensitive parabolic microphones. These pre-echoes, as they were nicknamed, had no logical explanation. Then came the night Dr. Su stayed behind alone. She'd become obsessed with the monastery, claiming she could feel a presence, not malevolent, but watching. She'd set up an overnight camp inside the chamber with thermal cameras and motion detectors. Her team found her the next morning, seated in the center of the room, facing the mural of a robed figure whose face had been scratched out long ago. Su was unharmed but unresponsive. It took 3 days before she spoke again, and when she did, she wouldn't speak in Mandarin, but in reconstructed Tangut phrases taken from the monastery's murals. She claimed to have listened to the city. What followed was a flurry of visits from government officials, historians, and even military scientists. The site was cordoned off. Equipment was removed. Dr. Su was placed under medical supervision, and the official story became one of structural instability and halted excavation. But whispers from those who were there, including one technician who leaked journal pages online, tell a different story: that the monastery contained a memory of sound, something no culture on Earth had ever recorded before. It wasn't echoes, it was preserved consciousness. One theory proposed by fringe researchers was that the Tangut monks had developed a spiritual technology of resonance. By using specific tones, chants, and architecture, they encoded thought, history, and even identity into the stone and air of the chamber itself. Not just recording voices, but the intentions behind them. A kind of metaphysical library only accessible through sound. This theory gained traction when they played back an extended audio loop recorded from the central chamber. Among the whispers, in a voice never present in the room, someone clearly says, "You've come back. We remember your name, Lien." That was when all public documentation of the project stopped. The Chinese government denied the site had ever been reopened, and satellite imagery of Khara Khoto was blurred out in official archives. Dr. Su was never heard from again. Some say she joined a remote monastery in Inner Mongolia. Others whisper she's still there, inside the Whispering Hall, listening to the voices of those who lived, and maybe still live, within the stone. Today, Khara Khoto remains off-limits, buried beneath sand and red tape. The city is a ghost again. But sometimes, according to nearby herders, you can hear chants carried on the desert wind. Faint, but insistent. As if the monastery itself is trying to speak, still repeating its message to anyone who might understand. The submerged citadel of Atlit. Beneath the sunlit surface of the Mediterranean Sea, off the coast of modern-day Israel, rests a city so old that it predates even the Egyptian pyramids. Lost to time and tide, it sat in silence for over 9,000 years, hidden beneath sediment and coral. Then, in 1984, a marine archaeologist named Ehud Galilei stumbled upon a series of curious stone formations while diving near the small fishing village of Atlit. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a scatter of rocks. But a closer inspection revealed walls, wells, and burial sites, clear signs of a human settlement. It was only later that the site earned its name, Atlit, the drowned citadel. What shocked Galilei and the archaeological world wasn't just the sheer age of the city, dating back to the Neolithic period, but its astonishing state of preservation. Buried beneath layers of silt, the buildings and artifacts were sealed from oxygen and decay. Whole sections of stone houses remained intact. Tools, bones, and even human skeletons were retrieved in remarkable condition. But the most startling find was at the heart of the city, a carefully arranged semicircle of 7 megaliths surrounding a freshwater spring. Each stone, weighing several hundred kilograms, was carved with cup marks and aligned in a pattern suggesting ritual significance. Many believed it to be one of the oldest known ritual centers in human history. And it still worked. The spring at the center of the circle was still flowing. The discovery of Atlit disrupted everything researchers thought they knew about Neolithic societies. The city had advanced water systems, agriculture, and evidence of organized religion long before such developments were thought possible. It painted a portrait of a civilization not primitive and tribal, but intelligent, complex, and thriving. But it wasn't just the ruins themselves that unsettled the archaeological teams, it was the implications. The sea level had risen over 8 meters since the time Atlit was inhabited. That meant the city had been abruptly submerged, most likely due to a massive post-glacial melt event or a tsunami. Skeletal remains showed signs of trauma consistent with sudden flooding. One woman was found clutching an infant. There were no signs of long-term decay or rebuilding efforts. The sea had claimed them all in what must have been a catastrophic event. Yet oddly, many structures showed signs of careful sealing, doors blocked from the inside, fire pits filled with stones, valuables left untouched. It was as if the people knew the end was coming. Even more mysterious were the dozens of skeletons found arranged in shallow graves, facing east, with their hands folded over their chests. Several showed signs of tuberculosis, confirmed through DNA analysis, making Atlit the site of the earliest known epidemic in human history. But here's where it gets stranger. 2 of the buried individuals had perfectly preserved soft tissue inside their lungs, completely out of sync with the conditions of their environment. No explanation could account for it. Furthermore, one child's remains showed a unique set of cranial anomalies, bones fused in patterns unseen in any other Neolithic skeletal record. The team dubbed the child the last oracle for the odd stone amulet found with the body, marked with a symbol resembling both a wave and a spiral, a motif unknown in nearby cultures. Then came the dreams. Several divers and researchers began reporting strange symptoms after spending extended time at the site. Mild hallucinations, vivid dreams of drowning, and a repeating sound that haunted their sleep, a rhythmic thrum like waves against hollow stone. At first dismissed as decompression side effects, the phenomena became harder to ignore when a senior archaeologist wrote in his journal, "They're not dreams. They're memories. Not mine. Theirs." The Israeli Antiquities Authority quietly restricted deep dives and issued tight access to researchers. Some speculated about natural gas emissions or magnetic fields affecting human brains, but none of these factors were consistent or measurable. One researcher, who later resigned, claimed he heard voices underwater. Not voices in his head, but spoken phrases in a language he could neither understand nor forget. "It sounded like an invitation," he said. "But not to come in. To remember." Soon, interest in Atlit Yam shifted from public curiosity to scientific secrecy. Funding was pulled from civilian projects, and military divers were seen in the area. Rumors surfaced that advanced underwater scanning technology had found a second structure deeper beneath the seabed, something massive, buried entirely in sediment. A chamber, some said. Others used the word vault. But without official access, the truth remains submerged. The last major public find from Atlit Yam was made in 1997, a strange clay disc inscribed with markings no known Neolithic culture used. The symbols weren't letters, but loops, spirals, and lattice-like grids. Some believed it to be a calendar, others a map. But a small group of fringe theorists claimed it was something else entirely, a record of a forgotten flood, a warning encoded in geometry, meant for the next civilization that would rise after the waters swallowed theirs. If that's true, then Atlit Yam is not just a city of the past, but a message from it. Today, the waters above the city remain calm. No tourist boats visit, no signs mark its location. But deep below, Atlit Yam waits. Its stones are still in place. The spring still flows. And the circle of megaliths continues to whisper a forgotten ritual to the sea. The Living Library of Timbuktu. In the heart of the Sahara Desert, beneath golden dunes and blistering skies, lies the ancient city of Timbuktu, a name that, for centuries, seemed almost mythological to the Western world. To most, it was nothing more than a distant legend, a symbol of faraway lands at the edge of the known world. But Timbuktu was once a glittering center of learning, trade, and science. What astonished archaeologists in recent decades wasn't just the discovery of that truth, it was the realization that it never fully disappeared. Hidden beneath layers of sand and secrecy, its ancient libraries still existed, and they were still in use. The first reports emerged in the late 1990s, when scholars studying trans-Saharan trade routes heard whispers from locals in Mali. Elders spoke of thousands of old manuscripts hidden in family homes, texts never catalogued by museums or colonial historians. Intrigued, a group of researchers traveled to the city, expecting perhaps a few scrolls in poor condition. Instead, they were met with an overwhelming sight: ancient volumes wrapped in goat leather, stacked in wooden chests, and protected by families who had guarded them for generations. And not dozens of books. Not hundreds. Over 700,000 manuscripts. Some were stored in humble clay houses, passed down like sacred heirlooms. Others were hidden in subterranean compartments, wrapped in cloth, sealed against the desert's assault. The materials ranged from astronomy, medicine, and law to complex mathematics and even philosophy. What shocked archaeologists was not just the volume, but the content. Many texts dated from the 13th to 16th centuries, during Timbuktu's golden age under the Mali Empire and later the Songhai Empire. But even more remarkably, some texts appeared far older, suggesting a literary tradition going back even further than believed. One manuscript included diagrams of planetary movements that accurately predicted the motion of Jupiter's moons, centuries before Galileo would document the same. Another listed medicinal recipes using desert herbs, including remedies for inflammation and respiratory illness that modern biochemists have found to be surprisingly effective. In one crumbling volume, a handwritten treatise on optics described how light bent through curved glass, predating Western accounts by over 200 years. It was clear that these weren't copies of foreign knowledge. They were original works, written by scholars whose names were forgotten by time but whose ideas were still intact, waiting to be read. The preservation of this knowledge was no accident. During the fall of Timbuktu to Moroccan forces in 1591, many scholars fled the city. But others stayed behind and went underground, literally. They hid their libraries in hidden rooms, beneath mosque floors, inside thick walls. The practice became tradition. Every time a new threat loomed, colonial occupation, religious conflict, or warlords, these families moved the texts again. For centuries, they avoided detection by keeping quiet, even as European explorers passed by clueless, obsessed with gold and ivory. By the early 2000s, archaeologists and historians realized they were dealing with something unprecedented, a living library, not a museum, not a ruined relic, but an active, breathing tradition of knowledge guardianship. Young people were being trained in the ancient script. Scribes still copied old texts by hand. Debates were still held in local madrasas about what certain passages meant. It was a moment of triumph, until 2012. That year, Timbuktu fell under the control of an extremist group during the Mali conflict. Armed militants stormed the city, burning shrines and threatening to destroy anything they deemed un-Islamic. Scholars around the world held their breath, fearing the manuscripts would be lost forever. But the guardians of Timbuktu had been preparing for this. In a breathtaking act of courage and organization, a librarian named Abdul Qadir Haidara and a network of local families and volunteers smuggled nearly 350,000 manuscripts out of the city. They hid the texts in metal trunks, loaded them onto donkey carts and canoes, and moved them at night across hundreds of miles of desert and river. Many of the carriers risked their lives, some were caught and beaten, but they kept going. The knowledge had to survive. The texts were relocated to secret sites in southern Mali. When international aid finally arrived, digital scanning operations began. To this day, thousands of pages are being preserved digitally, making their way to scholars across the globe. But the originals? They're still guarded, still hidden, still considered sacred. One archaeologist from Morocco who was permitted to study a collection described the experience as walking into a vault of time where the Middle Ages never ended, but kept evolving. He found marginalia in the pages, notes from readers debating points of theology or editing translations of Greek works into Arabic, and from Arabic into Songhai. It was not stagnant knowledge. It was dynamic. In one of the most mysterious manuscripts discovered, a water-damaged codex with no title, the pages outlined a theory of desert harmonics, detailing how sand dunes shift in rhythmic intervals linked to lunar phases. The author, unnamed, proposed that by watching dune shadows during certain moon cycles, one could predict the arrival of large-scale sandstorms. While initially dismissed as mysticism, satellite imaging has since shown that sand migration in the region does exhibit strange periodicity. The deeper the researchers looked, the clearer it became. Timbuktu wasn't an outpost. It was a beacon, a hub of science, art, and philosophical thought whose silence for centuries had been mistaken for disappearance. Today, Timbuktu is still a fragile place, beset by political instability, climate change, and the ever-present threat of looting. But its greatest treasure is no longer lost. It lives in the hands of its protectors, who continue to pass on the manuscripts, not just for fame or recognition, but out of duty. A sacred trust between generations. As one elderly guardian told a researcher during a rare interview, books can be burned, but memory, it walks. It talks. It teaches. That's how we survived. The hidden temple beneath the Vatican. Beneath the majestic sprawl of St. Peter's Basilica and the treasure-laden corridors of the Vatican lies a labyrinth few have ever seen. While the public marvels at Michelangelo's frescoes and St. Peter's tomb, the real secrets lie far below, sealed behind stone, guarded by silence, and cloaked in centuries of denial. For most, The Vatican is the epicenter of Catholicism. But in 2019, during a high-tech renovation of the underground infrastructure near the necropolis, a team of engineers and archaeologists stumbled upon something that had no place under a Christian city. A sealed chamber, buried deeper than any known catacomb, with no markings to identify it. No documents, no records in Vatican archives. As if it were never meant to be discovered at all. The Vatican authorities, initially reluctant, allowed a select team of archaeologists and theological scholars to enter and document the site. What they found left even the most seasoned experts in stunned silence. The chamber wasn't a tomb, nor a crypt. It was a temple. Circular in shape, carved with surgical precision into volcanic rock, the structure bore no resemblance to Christian architecture. Instead, its design echoed the mysteries of the Etruscans, a people whose influence on early Roman religion has long been acknowledged, yet poorly understood. The ceiling featured an open oculus, perfectly aligned with the sun's zenith during the equinox. Around the perimeter stood 12 pillars, each engraved with symbols that fused early Roman numerals with Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian cuneiform, a baffling mix of cultural references that should not have coexisted. The centerpiece of the temple was a smooth black altar, fashioned from a stone unlike any native to Italy. Tests would later suggest it had a composition nearly identical to basalt from Anatolia, thousands of kilometers away. Above it loomed a statue, a faceless figure in a flowing robe, arms outstretched, its head ringed with 7 radiating spikes, eerily similar to depictions of Sol Invictus, but with an entirely alien posture. No known god matched it. Yet it felt oddly familiar, like an archetype half-remembered in humanity's collective unconscious. When word of the discovery leaked to a small circle of scholars, debate ignited. Was it a pre-Christian pagan temple? A Roman cultic site? Or something older? As more carvings were translated, it became clear this was not a place of worship in the traditional sense. One phrase, etched repeatedly along the temple's inner ring, caught the team's attention. The light returns to those who remember the dark. Another inscription, more obscure, was translated loosely as, within this circle, time folds upon itself. The implications unsettled everyone, especially when strange phenomena began. Electromagnetic instruments behaved erratically within the chamber. Lights flickered. Batteries drained at an accelerated rate. Several team members reported hearing low-frequency tones, inaudible to others, while standing near the central altar. One technician, skeptical of the spiritual interpretations, suddenly collapsed and was found murmuring phrases in ancient Latin he had never studied. His words, transcribed from recordings, made little sense until a scholar cross-referenced them with banned Gnostic texts. The kingdom is beneath the stone. The kingdom is within the voice. Beware the one who listens without closing his eyes. The Vatican imposed an immediate lockdown. The official explanation given was structural risk due to unstable foundations. All access was revoked. The entire area was resealed, and the incident was buried deeper than the temple itself. But not everyone left empty-handed. A single fragment of the temple's wall had broken off during initial excavation. One researcher smuggled it out, hiding it within camera equipment. When examined later, it was found to contain microscopic carvings, too small for the naked eye. Under magnification, the carvings formed a spiral lattice of symbols not unlike binary code. One computer scientist, brought in covertly, claimed the arrangement resembled nonlinear data encoding, something akin to quantum computing storage. How such a concept could exist in a temple built centuries before Christ remains unexplained. The researcher who stole the fragment disappeared shortly after an encrypted message to a colleague. The only line that made it through was, "It's not a temple. It's a machine." In the years since, all mention of the discovery has been erased from Vatican records. The chamber's coordinates have been removed from public blueprints. None of the researchers involved have spoken publicly. Those who try are discredited, or quietly vanish from academia. Still, rumors persist. A janitor, employed at the Vatican for over 20 years, claimed in a hushed interview that strange vibrations come from beneath the chapel late at night. "Like breathing," he said. "Like something old, sleeping, but not dead." Others point to subtle shifts in Vatican doctrine over the last 5 years, emphasizing cosmic mystery, silence, and the unknowable nature of the divine. Coincidence or influence? No one knows exactly what lies beneath the basilica now. Whether the temple was a sanctuary, a gate, or a warning left behind by a forgotten civilization, one thing is certain: it was never meant to be found. And perhaps that's why it was buried, sealed not to protect us from forgetting, but to protect us from remembering. The vanishing village of Ukivok. Perched high above the churning Bering Sea, lashed by Arctic winds and blanketed in thick fog, the crumbling remains of a village still cling stubbornly to the cliffs of King Island, Alaska. From a distance, it looks like a ghost pinned to the edge of the world, wooden homes teetering on tall stilts, ladders hanging like frozen spiderwebs. For decades, the island has been declared uninhabited, its native Inupiat residents relocated by the U.S. government in the 1950s. But what modern archaeologists discovered upon returning to Ukivok was something no one expected: signs that the village was never truly abandoned. The mission began in 2020 as part of a joint project between the National Park Service and several indigenous heritage groups. Their goal was to document the remnants of Ukivok before harsh weather finally reduced it to splinters. For years, the island had been largely inaccessible. Storms, dangerous waters, and sheer cliffs made it difficult to approach. But during an unusually calm summer season, a team of researchers managed to land and begin their work. The village, though clearly in decay, felt oddly preserved. Houses were weather-beaten but still intact. Fishing lines had been left coiled in careful bundles. Footprints, some recent, marked the damp earth near doorways. And in the smoke-blackened interiors of several homes, researchers found unmistakable signs of life: freshly gutted fish, still with traces of warmth in their flesh. A cooking fire smoldered in one hut. Another held a pot of boiling water left atop a stone stove. No boats had been seen. No other teams were scheduled on the island. Initially, the archaeologists assumed squatters or survivalists had taken temporary shelter. But the further they explored, the stranger things became. One house contained a child's toy fashioned from whalebone and sinew, hand-carved, newly made. Beside it, a set of boot prints led across the wooden floor and simply stopped at a wall. Thermal imaging showed residual heat signatures in several cabins. One even revealed the outline of a body that had been sitting mere hours before their arrival. Disturbed but intrigued, the team set up night vision trail cameras along the village's narrow boardwalks and began monitoring the perimeter. On the second night, one camera captured footage of a figure walking upright, wrapped in furs, moving with incredible speed along a collapsed roofline. The figure stopped just before stepping into frame, looked directly at the lens, and the image distorted, overexposed and blurred, as though the equipment had been struck by static. No one approached or left. No signs of passage were found the next morning. Still, the most baffling discovery lay at the heart of the village: the communal dance house, called the Kargi. It was known historically as the spiritual center of Ukivok, where elders passed down oral traditions, rituals, and the knowledge of ice and sky. Inside, the archaeologists discovered carvings across the ceiling beams that had never been catalogued. Spirals, stars, wave patterns, but also symbols that matched petroglyphs found in Siberia, Greenland, and even northern Norway. One carving stood out: a circular motif with 12 points radiating outward, not unlike a compass rose, but with human faces at each direction. Beneath it, in soot-marked charcoal, someone had written a phrase in Old Inupiaq: "They left, but not all. We remember in the snow. We return with the ice." As the days passed, strange events escalated. Equipment went missing or reappeared in different places. One researcher, a geologist named Derek Sloan, vanished for nearly 12 hours. He was found seated at the edge of a cliff, staring out over the ocean, his hands ice-cold but unburned. He claimed he'd followed a boy into the mist, believing it was a local guide. "He kept laughing," Sloan said. "He said I was late, and the tide was coming." There were no children on the island. Local Inupiat elders, when told of these findings, grew solemn. One elder, Analuk, spoke of Ukivokmiat, the people of King Island, as not merely a displaced community, but as watchers. "We were taught they did not vanish," she said. "They folded into the stone. When the world forgets them, they become shadows. When we remember them, they walk again." A local legend reinforced her claim, a story of a winter long ago, when Ukivok was buried in fog for 30 days, and no one could find it. When the sun returned, the village had reappeared, every lamp still lit, every fish still drying in the wind. It was called the month the island held its breath. Now, archaeologists began to wonder, had the island chosen to stay hidden? Satellite imaging offered a clue. In photos taken during heavy storms, King Island appeared missing entirely, a blank space in the sea. Radar returned no elevation. But when conditions cleared, it reappeared, as solid and physical as ever. No one could explain the anomaly. Geological surveys found magnetic irregularities around the cliffs, fields that interfered with compasses, drone equipment, and even GPS tracking. The final mystery came from the drone footage captured during their departure. One last sweep over the village showed a gathering of figures, 6 or 7, standing motionless in front of the kargi. No one had seen them arrive. The footage was grainy, but their eyes reflected light like animals at night. By the time the drone circled back for a second pass, the figures were gone. Today, the ruins of Ukivok remain officially uninhabited. The U.S. government lists it as abandoned. Yet researchers now quietly monitor the island from a distance. A few still believe the village is not just a site of cultural memory, but a place where memory itself has weight, and perhaps, life. The last journal entry by one of the archaeologists, now classified, read simply, "They were never lost. Just waiting for the right eyes to see them again." Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?